The Full Melt Show is intended for a mature audience. It contains adult themes, adult content, and sometimes adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
It's the Full Melt Show.
Tool to reach out. Many businesses use Facebook as a tool to reach out to customers, but medical marijuana dispensaries here in Arizona won't be able to post on the social media site.
That's because Facebook is suspending the accounts of those businesses. The site is not allowing content that would promote the sale of marijuana, regardless of whether or not marijuana is legal in the state where the dispensary is located.
KOLD News 13's caught up with one of the dispensaries. Kristen Hobrook is joining us live tonight. She talked with them earlier today. Kristen, they're pretty upset about this, right?
Yes, Heather, medical marijuana shops like the downtown dispensary say it's frustrating to have their business page shut down. Many of our local medical marijuana shops use Facebook as their main source for advertising.
Blindsided. I think that would have been a good word for it.
Florence Hijazi with Earth's Healing Medical Marijuana Dispensary was in disbelief when she logged onto their Facebook page and found this notification that said their page was now unpublished.
We had about 1,500 likes that we'd been growing constantly for the past 2 years, and it was just gone, no warning.
The social networking site suspended all medical marijuana dispensaries in Arizona, despite the fact that the sale of medical pot has been legal for years.
It's frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Manager of the downtown dispensary, Adriana Tyson, shares Hijazi's disappointment in the decision. Both cannabis shops say Facebook is a main advertising avenue and a way to educate patients. Facebook does allow marijuana advocacy on its website, but does not allow content that promotes the sale of marijuana. In a statement tonight, a Facebook spokesman said this, quote, "In order to maintain a safe environment on Facebook, we have a community standards that describe what is and is not allowed on the service. Anyone can report content to us if they think it violates our standards. Our teams review these reports rapidly and will remove the content if there is a violation." As for Hijazi, she doesn't plan to appeal the Facebook decision. Instead, she'll use other forms of social media to promote their products.
There's no use fighting it. We're going to do more with our Twitter account, more with our mobile app. We have a mobile app.
Selling marijuana for medical use is currently legal in 23 states, but Facebook is now unpublishing business pages across the country. Reporting live downtown, Kristen Hobrook, KOLD News 13, live local.
Are you high? What are you talking about?
This is the Full Melt.
The Full Melt Show. A marijuana discussion about news, culture, politics, and lifestyle. FullMelt.com. Toll free. 844-420-TALK. 844-420-TALK.
Welcome to the Full Melt Show for Tuesday. God, it's the 16th of February already. 2016. The year that Bernie Sanders is taking over the Democratic Party and potentially the nation. Can you believe what's going on there with this whole Supreme Court thing? And Justice Scalia, God rest his soul. Look, I'm not going to celebrate this man's death in any way. I never celebrate anybody's death unless they were close to me and they needed some celebration. But I do celebrate the end of his reign of terror, I think, on the Supreme Court. It has, in my opinion, been, well, at least at the, let's just back it off. I'll turn the flames down just a little bit. Okay, I'll turn them down a lot. The issue that I have with the Supreme Court is that it's leaned conservative. And I have no problem with either conservative or, liberal parties, progressive parties. They're opposite ends of the spectrum of our belief system here with regards to politics. I'm not going to lambaste either side, although I will say this. The country works best when that pendulum is somewhere in the middle. And for the longest time, for some 30-plus years now, the Supreme Court, maybe even 40 years now, the Supreme Court has leaned conservative. And it's all been up to the vote of Justice Scalia. He's the guy that heads up that side of whatever would be the ticket on the court. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, but clearly there are liberal judges and conservative judges. Or I would call them progressive. I don't know. It seems like the conservative side of things kind of mucked up the liberal term. It's been stigmatized now, like liberal is some terrible thing. Look, when I use salt on my food, I do it liberally. If I want something, I will take the liberty. That's what this is, liberal. I take the liberty of putting on there as much as I need based on taste, right? Salt to taste. Being conservative about application of salt, in my analogy, would not do the deed intending to be done. I'm trying to flavor my food. I'm trying to make my food taste better. I'm trying to make it more appealing. So why would I put on a conservative amount of salt? Well, I suppose it might be smart to start out small. Perhaps taste the food first, see if it needs some salt. Then move along, add a little bit more until taste is acquired. But you might have to be liberal about that application to achieve your goal. So I'm happy to see that at least right now the court's been neutered. It has. It's been neutralized. It is a 4-4 court until we get a new Supreme Court justice. And you've seen all the controversy, I'm sure, surrounding that issue already. The Supreme Court is the last word on law and politics in this country. You know, we're divided into three parts. We've got three branches of government. You've got the executive branch, which includes law enforcement. You got the judicial branch, which is all about just applying the law. In the case of the Supreme Court, applying only constitutional law as it relates to any given question. And then you've got the legislative branch, the ones who write all the laws. And you know, that thing's all twisted up right now, especially when it's the legislative branch with the lead of the executive branch that determines who's going to sit on that court. The president can't do it by himself wholly. He puts up a nomination, and the Senate is required by law. I mean, they're the only ones who can provide advice and consent, is what it's called in the Constitution. Advice and consent means you've explained who this person is, and, you know, they had a chance to interview this individual and vet him, so to speak, or her, and then they hold a vote on consent. There are many lies being told right now by candidates, specifically Cruz and probably Trump, too. Trump has more crap coming out of his mouth. Well, I won't even make that analogy. Cruz isn't far behind him, though. And neither one are afraid to bend and twist the truth and embellish it for their advantage. Now, I'm not saying that any politician isn't prone to shining the best light on their campaign. That's not at argument. What it's at argument is the idea that you would alter the truth and embellish it. That's not shining the best light. That's fabrication. That is trying to deceive. And many times this fabrication ends up doing its deed. It ends up deceiving people. So I'm just really, really personally happy that the court has been neutered, because it would only follow that the chances would exist that the pendulum would continue to swing, and maybe the people at the progressive end of politics might have a chance to decide issues at our nation's highest level. I mean, remember, this is the same court that decided that Bush is going to be president over Gore with the hanging chads in 2000, remember? I remember it well. I was living all the money and support from all the big money donors across the country. And I'm talking mostly like the Koch brothers and people like him, or them. had an opportunity to control this arena because it has direct effect on the question that we bally about on this show. And that's the cannabis question. We already know that the legislature is screwed between the eyes. I mean, from left temple to right, the legislature is screwed on this issue. As they're beholden to big money, the people who prop up prohibition and its false messaging and the drug war in general have all their nest eggs invested in prohibition, all the things that prohibition feeds off of, that it makes money from. Let's just understand that prohibition is a business model. It purports to be public policy over public safety, but when you sniff it, when you look at it, when you get the bigger picture, when you actually examine it for its merits, it achieves no goals. None of its stated goals ever get achieved. Now, there would never be a business operate this way were it not for donated money and special interest input, where the mission statement of the business is never achieved, but lots and lots of money is funneled into it nonetheless. Lots of investment keeps being made in a business that has completely failed and has for better than 40 years at the peak of its interest. So when you don't have a business that is achieving its main goals, and that's what prohibition is, it's a business. It's, like I said, just reminding you, it claims to be social policy. It claims to be law for public safety. It is none of the above. That's just how it's sold. That's how it's packaged. That's how it's marketed. That's how it's perceived. And they spend a lot of money to get you to accept that perception. Some of us are bright enough to see through the veil and understand that there is a big curtain there, and there's a little man from Oz behind the curtain with no power whatsoever, just deception. And so I guess today we'll spring forward from that hope, because in my heart of hearts, I truly believe, and it's not by political leaning, it's just by examination, careful examination, of the political cards that have been dealt. And I'll just tell you, I thank God for Donald Trump and all of his money. Not because he's got money and he can do anything, but because Donald Trump is the linchpin in what's going to hang the Republican Party. Because we don't need the Bushes back in office. We don't need any of that trickle-down bullshit controlling this issue or any others, because it is also a failed policy. Oh, see, there's that term, failed policy. We'll get into all the news that hangles and raggles around cannabis and medical marijuana next, right here on The Full Melt Show.
You're getting the full melt.
When you need legal help, you don't want to guess at who's standing next to you in court. And when it comes to a medical marijuana defense, it's even smarter to partner with a lawyer before you need one. Based in Royal Oak, David Rudoy has a proven history of not being afraid to take your case all the way to the Supreme Court and win. Find the law offices of Rudoy Law
at RudoyLaw.com.
RudoyLaw.com is a quick reference on your rights concerning Michigan medical marijuana
and up-to-date news.
That's RUDOI Law.com. Call 248-935-9074 now and talk about your legal needs, because at RudoyLaw.com, we don't just stand up for you, we stand up with you.
RootMetrics, in the nation's largest independent study, tested wireless performance across the country. Verizon won big with 153 state wins. AT&T got 38, Sprint got 2, and T-Mobile got 0. Verizon also won first in the U.S. for data, call, speed, and reliability. AT&T got text. Stuck on an average network? Join Verizon, and we'll cover your cost to switch.
It's Steve Green for the Sweet Leaf in Flint, because now getting safe access to medical cannabis patients in Flint, Michigan is never more welcoming. Presenting the Sweet Leaf, a brand new patient experience, bringing 12 carefully selected caregivers housed in 9 separate offices to distinctly assist you with their knowledge and reputation for excellent patient care. Classes and training coming soon in the large community room. Check it out in person, 400 South Door Highway, or call 810-259-2571. The Sweet Leaf Center in Flint, 810-259-2571.
What's up with these things, Victor?
We decided to give ourselves stickers for each feature we release.
We read about 10,000 suggestions a week to create features that, as traders, we'd want to use.
10,000 suggestions? Who reads all of those?
He does.
For all the confidence you need, TD Ameritrade, you got this.
Introducing Sacred Elements, a place for natural and alternative healing for the mind, body, and soul. Sacred Elements. It's one place, all solutions.
Registered, licensed, certified, ordained.
Sacred Elements.
Massage, hypnosis, Reiki.
Sacred Elements.
Raindrop, aroma and color therapy, body detox, ministry, life coaching, weight and nutrition counseling.
Sacred Elements. Next to the Sweet Leaf, 400 South Shore Highway, Flint.
11 to 7 daily, closed Sunday.
Call 810-259-2570. It's the Full Melt Radio Show.
Radio show.
On the program today, we'll be discussing a couple of things that have been in the news. It's always about news, isn't it? Almost nothing on this show is not news. Lawmakers in New Mexico killing marijuana legalization as a measure on the ballot in 2016. We'll dig into that story a little bit. There is a Senate committee in Wyoming that is approving a medical marijuana edibles prohibition. And then there's the top story of the day. That top story is cash-only marijuana dispensaries flood California tax office with paper. This was reported in The Guardian. Cash-operated businesses have always been a question mark, haven't they? I mean, why do you think the impetus to create credit and debit came along? Or the idea of checks? I think checks obviously were the first answer to that question. What do we do with all of our cash? When they started selling things like automobiles, where the price tag was way too high for an average consumer, and they had to figure out how to break it down into pieces that the American consumer and business could both swallow. There became this question of what do we do with the cash? It really started before that, but I'm just using this as an example. Who shows up at a dealership for any product, really, where you got to go to a dealer to get it? Who shows up and hands over thousands of dollars in cash? A fool, that's who. In fact, I would make the bet that a cash sale of that size may be prohibited by the store for security reasons. They want to put the cashier handling that amount of cash in jeopardy over a miscount. It's easy to stash away hundreds of dollars of mistakes over just simple counting because each mistake is a $100 bill in either favor. So when you create a cash business, then you got the question of checks. Now, why don't people write checks? Well, because people don't honor them. And who wants, in the medical marijuana question, in the retail cannabis question, because they're both the same question, where you're making the same kind of purchase, who wants to drag somebody off to court over several $100s worth of an illegal substance at the federal level? And then you got the whole question of the banks. Once they find out you're writing checks for weed, they're going to close your account. I'm just telling you. These transactions are prohibited by the bank, which is the established institution that is the drawer holder for that money. It's a security problem all the way around. The transaction is insecure because we're not sure exactly how much money's there. We're not equipped to handle those kinds of counting transactions in daily business. If you're just dealing in small amounts of cash, but have a lot of business, I don't care if you're selling lollipops. If you're selling $50,000 worth of lollipops in a day on location, you better find a way to handle that cash because you're probably going to get robbed, or at least you've always got that prospect, don't you? Criminals are never afraid to take advantage of a cash-heavy opportunity. And if you're an easy target and inexperienced, don't have systems in place to handle that cash, don't have systems in place to handle the transaction itself, let alone its detail after the purchase, after the sale, there's a real security problem. So marijuana businesses of any type, retail or medical, have been forced into just dealing with cash because the banks aren't allowed to do it with checks. Do you think they're going to be allowed to do it with electronic transactions? The answer is double no. At least the check, there's a fingerprint they could get off there. There's some, I mean, when you're passing that check, there are cameras usually in place. I mean, we know who the account holder is. We know there's a paper trail and people to follow it. And there's also the same thing goes with the electronic transactions, but you might be even fraudulently representing that electronic account. So these are just other bigger problems, bigger questions. So these pop businesses have all been forced to deal in cash, and usually with hired security who've come along on this adventure to take advantage of the money there. The businesses are legally unable to write checks or make credit card transactions, raising questions of safety as people carry huge sums. This is how the story goes in The Guardian. The Sacramento branch of California Tax Collection, this affects taxes too. That's right, you got to pay your taxes in cash. This is tantamount if you're owing thousands of dollars in cash. This is the same thing as coming to McDonald's and paying for your $10 McDonald's meal in pennies. They may force you out of line if you do that. They certainly aren't going to take your coins unwrapped because they're much harder to count and take much longer to count. They'll do away with the business. They'll turn that $10 away before they'll put themselves through the pace of having to measure your pennies. This is all because it's a cash day at the collection center. And when marijuana dispensary owners are allowed to bring in paper money to pay their quarterly sales tax bill, and the smell of their inventory clings to everything. California, like all states with any form of legalized marijuana, faces a growing problem over the federal government's position that cannabis remains a Schedule I illegal drug, a controlled substance classified the same way as meth or cocaine, with no legal uses, and therefore no legal access to traditional banks. And that also means that medical marijuana dispensaries, along with growers, distributors, and other marijuana-related businesses that are operating legally under state laws, have no choice but to be cash-only businesses. They can't write checks, deposit money in financial institutions, or make credit card transactions. We've been a cash industry forever, and it's been quite a problem, says Kimberly, the director of a nonprofit-based dispensary in Sacramento, who asked that her name not be used for safety reasons. I wonder why. She's probably running around with a lot of cash. Duh. I've lost my place here. Sorry. I looked away and I did the I looked away and I lost my place. We don't want to drive around town paying our bills in cash. We want to be able to just go to the bank. Kimberly was at the tax office making a payment of more than $30,000, but officials with the agency, the Board of Equalization, say that is a relatively small amount. Recently, at the San Francisco office, a $400,000 payment came in carried in big bags as cash, said George Renner, a BOE board member. The day before in Sacramento, $150K came in as a single payment. That kind of cash being brought into a non-secure facility raises safety issues, just as I said, as well as practical ones, issues that the BOE and other agencies are scrambling to address as new medical marijuana laws in the state increases the amount of tax money being paid. So what you have here is the government getting hooked on the teat of business, but one that they profess they will not allow. See, the money, when you start dragging the question of the government into this, when it comes to money, boy, the position seems to modify very quickly, doesn't it? I mean, Colorado did this. They modified their position instantly about the public safety of marijuana. Oh, we came around. We came to the truth. No, you didn't come to the truth. You already knew the truth or were sold the false lies and used it as a way to make money. Now that, you can't find a marijuana conviction before any jury in Colorado because that's what started this whole ball rolling. I know, I went there. I talked to people. I asked them, why were you guys so successful? Why did you beat California to getting marijuana legalized? Well, part of that question lies in the fact that California, it might as well be 3 or 4 states because politically they're divided up like that. And in order to win California, you got to really win all of them, all of those little sections, all of those little subdivisions. So when you talk about Colorado, it's much smaller in populace. It's much smaller in territory. But even inside the territory that exists, much of Colorado is wilderness and mountain, despite its occupation by people on occasion. Coloradoans told me, look, we figured out a way to get jury nullification done in a permanent way here, or at least in a mainstay way, one that's not going away. Jurists in Colorado made up the decision collectively as a populace that they're not going to convict people and spend their precious tax dollars on those resources when no goals are being achieved. Putting this person in jail or in prison or giving the conviction only adds to the negative side of our state, not the positive side. That guy is going to be replaced by somebody else doing the exact same thing. And it's just going to cost us money to put that guy away or to give him a record. And then how's he getting a job and being a part of the economy in the future? That's what they figured out. And so they decided, we don't care if it's a guy with 53 bales of pot coming in from Utah. Like that ever happened. Okay, coming in from someplace through the Mexican, spice route. When this pot comes in and these guys sell it, we're simply going to not convict. And prosecutors got very quickly frustrated, and so did police, with juries turning back these decisions unfettered in their position of not guilty. And so this posed a particular problem, exactly a financial one, incidentally, for the people in Colorado. Because their courts were used to that drug money. Their police were used to that drug money. Things were faltering because that drug money was no longer coming in. Even though I'm sure the size of their jails diminished. They were still spending this money. They were still planning for this money. There was still an outlet for it, but it was no longer coming in. How do we answer this question? Well, the natural gravitation when you've got people pushing for legal weed is to go, wait a minute, there's revenue attached to this proposal. We didn't see that before. But now that there's revenue attached, and it not only patches that hole, but some other ones, it's starting to make more prospect for not a public safety issue anymore. We're just going to brush that aside with our feet while we look away. That's no longer part of, we don't believe that. We never believed that. See, it's proof in these places. And it's also evidenced by the history since it's happened. The sky didn't cave in. People weren't running murderously down the streets naked. Children weren't being harmed. In fact, they were being protected because the drug dealer on the street doesn't give a crap about whether the person coming in with that money has a card or is an adult. They only care about that money. And guess what? Because they don't care about those things, they might have other drugs for sale as well. That's where the slippery slope starts. It doesn't start with, pot doesn't get me high anymore. Baloney. If the bag you got doesn't get you high anymore, go get another bag and smoke on that for a while. It's going to change your perspective. And guess what? When you're done smoking that bag, or when that bag is no longer doing its trick, you go back to the first bag and it's just as great. It's just as great as you started with. It's everything you remembered but weren't getting towards the middle. So the question looms, what do you do with all that cash? And the answer still hasn't been made in Colorado, even though but now they're forced to deal with the ramifications of not answering that question. Since they weren't able to institute their own credit union because the Fed said, no, we're not giving your credit union access to the electronic banking system. I think it's called the EBS or the EBN. I mean, it's a clearinghouse for all electronic transactions, save account-to-account transactions involving banks. I mean, I'm talking if you're going to wire money from one bank to another or from one account to another. That's done through what's called an automatic cash handling system, or ACH handling. It's an electronic advice from one computer to another, taking the funds from one account and putting it in another. It's really cost-free. Except for maintaining the network, it doesn't cost a penny, but they'll charge you for it at those dirty banks. Credit card transactions use a different clearinghouse, and it's the same one for all the processors generally use, individual processors actually start the transaction. So it's a paid company if you've got a MasterCard Visa machine. This doesn't apply to PayPal, though they go through the same processes. They just make it simpler for you at your end. You don't have to. Before PayPal, if you wanted to accept credit card transactions, you had to go through, and I've done it. You got to go to the bank, and you've got to have really good credit. I mean, it's got to be in the 700s at least. And if you don't have good credit, they'll deny you based on that alone before they look at anything else. But they also might deny you unless they have a picture of your storefront. They want to make sure you've got appropriate equipment in there that's been tested and approved by their system. I mean, there's a whole bunch of giant hoops you got to jump through, and they're not off the ground by a few inches. They're way up there. You might need a ladder to jump through that hoop. A lot harder. But these places have their own system, and it's the same network, but all the individual processors have access to that network and pay for access to that network, and then they charge their customers a lot more than they pay. See, you charge more than you pay, and you make a profit. Each of these systems is easy to delve into when it comes to investigating money trails and all this kind of stuff. And there's nothing that says the IRS nor the federal government as a whole doesn't have an interest in tracking down some of these transactions and busting them under drug law or money laundering laws. Or maybe even the big kahuna that was really designed for gangsters, RICO statutes. You know what that is, don't you? I mean, that's how they got John Gotti. They tried to get John Gotti with RICO statutes. It didn't work so well. They finally had to get him on a murder rap. They couldn't just get him on corruption. They couldn't get him on, racketeering. They had to get him on murder because, again, somehow, someway, the mafia managed to make sure that the jurists always came back with a not guilty decision. The Teflon Don, he was deemed before he died in prison. So when you look at California and you look at other places where medical marijuana or cash transactions are involved in the marijuana business, you've got to figure out what you're doing with all that cash. And you can find the rest of that story at The Guardian at theguardian.com. Cash-only marijuana dispensaries flood California tax office with paper and send people a-scrambling as a result.
You're getting the full melt.
I've seen things no man should bear, and those that every man should dare. From the beaches of Normandy to the far reaches of the earth. In my life, I have lived millions of lives. I've outrun robots and danced with dinosaurs. I've faced the faces of fear and fortitude and witnessed great beauty in the making. I've kept the company of kings and queens, but I'm no royalty or saint. I've traveled, trekked, wandered, and roamed, only to find myself right where I belong.
Jeep. See your authorized Jeep retailer for details on how you can become a Jeep owner.
We ask people to tell us something that happened in their past and something that might happen in their future. The good things were put on yellow magnets and the bad ones on blue. The results show the past was a pretty even mix of good and bad, yet the future was almost all good things. Now that you've seen the results of this experiment, what does it mean to you?
We all want to think about positive stuff.
Realistically, there will be down times.
It's great to think optimistically, but let's plan for whatever the future might bring.
Prudential, bring your challenges.
If you're like us, your pets aren't just animals. They're members of your family. Pet Pain CBD hemp oil drops are great for aging as well as active dogs and cats. Some people are apprehensive about hemp treatments for pets. They ask us, what are you smoking? Absolutely nothing, and neither will your pet. Like other hemp-based products for humans, the allure is all of the benefits of cannabis without any of the high. The CBD oil has shown to rejuvenate the bones, joints, brain, stomach, eyes, and heart. And the drops contain absolutely no corn, wheat, soy, artificial colors and flavors, or preservatives. Pick some up today. Visit petpain.com or ask for Pet Pain at your local pet store. Petpain.com. CBD relief for your pets.
It's the Full Melt Radio Show. I got one question for you. Can you feel the burn? A lot of pot people are smoking the burn. Bernie Sanders taking a big note amongst millennials and the younger people that are voting this year. There's a crap ton of them coming on board. Question is, will they show up at the polls traditionally? They don't. But I think that this particular generation of people that's coming on board as new voters, they're a little more savvy to the politics of things. They may be just as disconnected. But I don't think they're quite as pacifists as generations prior. Because at least in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, you had people coming to the polls brand new, not. In other words, they weren't showing up at polls. They were busy being fed by what started out as, quarter video games, but ended up being Nintendo and PS2 and all the rest. This is when we were becoming gluttonous in this country. Up until then, we really didn't have widespread gluttony. These are the years where Americans were growing fat. We got fatter every decade as a whole. And we became more interested in entertainment because, boy, it's a lot easier to be drawn away from things like the Vietnam War and the stuff going on in the 80s, which was a lot, the collapse of the Soviet Union, some excitement over there. But, there was also the Iran-Contra scandal. And then that brings us into the 90s, and then you got Waco and the Oklahoma City bombing. It just goes on. Ruby Ridge, I want to say, and then eventually the Ruby Ridge and Waco led to the Oklahoma City bombing. It led to terrorism in our own country at the hand of Americans, patriotic Americans, ex-military patriotic Americans, who got sick of the idea that the government wasn't representing any longer what they did. So many of the youngsters coming to the polls were automatically, right out of the gate, dead on arrival because they were pre-disenfranchised. Oh, boy, that's adding two prefixes to a verb. When you look at young voters, you've got to pay attention to what they care about. And this is always what the older generations manage to lose in sizing them up. They underestimate them for who they are because they don't really know who they are. They've become estranged with their siblings, their young, or not their siblings, but their offspring. In the process of growing your kid up and giving him the freedom he needs to become independent and a person amongst themselves, you grow distant from your child. Your child starts doing things that are out of your sight and not necessarily made known to you. And there are various and sundry, other things, trust and all these other things you bring into these relationships. But the point is that you get disconnected with your own family. And so you make assumptions and draw correlations, extrapolate this to the rest of the population when that's not even applicable, because your little bubble is nothing like the rest of the world's bigger bubble. And certainly the bubble that's smaller than the world's inside the United States and then inside your own state and then inside your own city. There's little bubbles. And I don't know if you know it or not, but people generally tend to live, grow up, travel, work, and die in a 50-mile bubble from their house. So this is why when you go from one state to another, things change drastically. Things as different as barbecue. Ask somebody in Michigan what barbecue is and compare that with a Texan and then compare that with somebody from Tennessee. They'll all give you different answers to that question. And they're all right. They're all correct answers. It's just their version of it. It's like a phenotype. It's still marijuana, but it's this strain or that strain. It's a pheno of this strain or that strain. Even the phenotypes in a certain strain are going to be different from each other, drastically different in many cases. politics does this selective breeding as well. I mean, ask a kid from a liberal household or from a progressive household how he leans, and he'll tell you likely it's the same way his parents do. His or her parents. So you end up not sizing these communities up. And I'm just saying I've been paying great attention to the differences between these generations. And I think the ones that are coming on board here are particularly connected to issues. Things matter to them. They want to live in a world where resources are still available and protected and insured into the future. People that are blinded by cash suddenly can't see those things. When you talk about, hey, we can create this company, but here are the environmental things that we're going to have to give up for it. Suddenly the environment doesn't matter anymore, even though you subsist off of it, even though you live off of it. Your very existence depends upon the environment. It's almost like a drug addiction, isn't it? Where people are making decisions, foolish decisions, bad decisions, based not upon what their future might represent, but based upon the immediate need today. And so I think you're going to see a lot of the Bernie Sanders thing growing in popularity simply because the millennials have not the millennials, but rather the new group of voters, the young voters, have enough size and wherewithal to change any one given election. Completely change its outcome, because these elections generally have been very close in recent years. We haven't had a landslide presidential election since Reagan came into office. I mean, that's a long time ago. It seems like yesterday to me, because I lived through all that stuff. I remember watching Saturday Night Live and this is still in its early heyday after the initial cast had disbanded and was off, which really wasn't that long. I mean, we're 10 years into a 40-year history at this point. And on Saturday Night Live, I remember the cast talking about Ronald Reagan and his trickle-down theory. It may have even been the original cast, now that I think about it. Because I remember, it seems like I remember Bill Murray being a part of that sketch. But they were standing out in the street, and they were talking about how nobody wanted to get trickled on. I mean, even the name is a little demeaning, isn't it? Oh, I'll stand down here and get trickled on. Of course, they were making a pee reference, and it was funny. But I remember at that point in time deciding that I do not want to be part of the trickled-on in America. And I don't want to be doing any trickling on anybody. I don't. Just because somebody is of less means than I might be doesn't make them any more important or any more interesting or any more friend-worthy. People end up in cliques, and it gets so strange. So I'm hoping that my surmise is correct. I'm hoping that the research and my careful scrutiny and paying attention to all the details coming up with the younger generation. See, I know what the younger generation listens to. I know what they watch. I know what they buy. I know what they like, generally. And I think that these particular people are going to show up in the polls in higher numbers, just high enough, to throw the election. There are several other things that are involved in throwing this election. This election cycle is so strange. See, the younger folks, I've paid attention. They're also, even though they don't necessarily use cannabis, have been extremely educated in their 18 years. I mean, remember, it's premillennial, this introduction into medical marijuana. So these kids have grown up where some form of marijuana has been legal across the country their entire lives. Why would they want to stick to a policy that says jail people and give them, all of the grind of the criminal justice system, not to mention the stigma attached and loss of employment? Why would they do that to people? Why would they do that to any generation? See, they've seen this light. None of our generations, prior to the millennial generation, have been exposed in this way, have been so educated on one subject because it's just been at the forefront of their coming of age. So I think you're going to see them show up, and I think you're going to see in numbers enough to make a change in the election, as I said before. But then you've got the whole look. I don't think Hillary thought she was going to be an underdog again, and I think in some ways Bernie Sanders has made her that a second go round. If Hillary loses this election, she's going to go hide her head. You'll never see her in public office again. She won't be appointed to Supreme Court. She won't be appointed to any other governmental positions, and if she's asked to, she'll likely decline because she's getting old and she's got grandchildren and lots of money. Who in that prime of life, under those conditions, doesn't want to take a break away from the grind and the political spotlight, the focus, the limelight, the pressure of high public office, especially a presidential one? Because that would be a potential 8 more years she'd commit to this environment before retiring. I mean, that's what she'd be looking into, and just in looking into the race. Do I still want to do this potentially 8 years from now? And she said yes. Bernie Sanders, I don't know if he'd be capable, honestly, of doing an 8-year run. The man is 79 years old. Or wait, no, sorry. 79. I mean, he'd be nearly 90 years old by the time he got out of office if he lived a natural life through it and then was replaced by the following election. He'd run his term out and be 90. Or pretty close to it. I mean, I thought Reagan was decrepitly old, and he was. I mean, he was already suffering from Alzheimer's before he left office. You can watch Nancy Reagan put her arm into the neck and behind, like a ventriloquist, and say the words for him. There are many clips where the president is being queried by the press, Ronald Reagan, where Nancy's standing in the background with an earshot of both Ronnie's ear and the microphone, where she would just kind of through the side of her mouth say something as a response to the reporter's question, and then he would repeat it with feeling, which is what actors do. Ronald Reagan. Feel the burn. A couple of more subjects before we get out of the show today. Only a meek 10 minutes left in today's program. Just wanted to get over this idea that in Wyoming, the Senate there has approved a marijuana edibles prohibition, and they're marching down that road now. And then lawmakers in New Mexico killing a marijuana legalization measure. We'll explore both of those stories coming up next.
You're getting the full melt.
Promotional consideration provided by NoSmell.com, pioneering the storage market for cannabis users. The NoSmell patented bag technology offers users 100% smell-proof detection from even the most sophisticated of noses. NoSmell.com, so nobody knows. When placing your order for a no-smell bag, make sure to use discount code FULLMELT and take 10% off the entire order. Learn more about no-smell technology at NoSmell.com.
Young students are our future. They're eager to learn, eager to succeed, eager to make the world a better place. And they want to make it to school safely. Share the road, take care when passing, and always leave 3 feet between you and people on bikes. Bikes are legal road vehicles. We're all drivers.
When you need legal help, you don't want to guess at who's standing next to you in court. And when it comes to a medical marijuana defense, it's even smarter to partner with a lawyer before you need one. Based in Royal Oak, David Rudoy has a proven history of not being afraid to take your case all the way to the Supreme Court and win. Find the law offices of Rudoy Law
at RudoyLaw.com.
RudoyLaw.com is a quick reference on your rights concerning Michigan medical marijuana
and up-to-date news.
That's RUDOI Law.com. Call 248-935-9074 now and talk about your legal needs, because at RudoyLaw.com, we don't just stand up for you, we stand up with you.
If you're like us, your pets aren't just animals. They're members of your family. Pet Pain CBD hemp oil drops are great for aging as well as active dogs and cats. Some people are apprehensive about hemp treatments for pets. They ask us, what are you smoking? Absolutely nothing, and neither will your pet. Like other hemp-based products for humans, the allure is all of the benefits of cannabis without any of the high. The CBD oil has shown to rejuvenate the bones, joints, brain, stomach, eyes, and heart. And the drops contain absolutely no corn, wheat, soy, artificial colors and flavors, or preservatives. Pick some up today. Visit petpain.com. or ask for Pet Pain at your local pet store. PetPain.com. CBD relief for your pet.
Hey, it's Steve Green for the Sweet Leaf in Flint, because now getting safe access to medical cannabis patients in Flint, Michigan is never more welcoming. Presenting the Sweet Leaf, a brand new patient experience, bringing 12 carefully selected caregivers housed in 9 separate offices to distinctly assist you with their knowledge and reputation for excellent patient care. Classes and training coming soon in the large community room. Check it out in person, 400 South Door Highway, or call 810-259-2571. The Sweet Leaf Center in Flint, 810-259-2571. 571. It's the Full Melt Radio Show. Promise you I'll get to these other 2 stories in just a couple of seconds. But I wanted to bring your attention to something very important. You know, there was this big change in Ohio that happened. It was really about this time last year that there was this big push being made for Issue 3. Remember Issue 3? That's the monopoly, quote unquote, that people build it as. Really an oligopoly. Really, it's multiple businesses controlling the same marketplace. But there's nothing to keep them from being in cahoots with each other. It's really easy to say, let's price fix. If we're the only 10 guys selling the weed, let's just price fix. So competition can't. We won't compete against each other. We'll just all be in the same basket. It's illegal as the day is long. And you'd probably be eventually broken up by the federal government. Monopolies aren't allowed to exist. Antitrust laws. Hello? That's a doctrine that goes way back. Go figure it out. I'm not going to lead you down that path. But this business with Ohio and Issue 3, it went down at the hands of voters. They clearly, through polling, suggest that the citizenry of Ohio, if its true feelings were known, don't really care that much about marijuana, as conservatives they are. They're right up there with California and Colorado on this. California, Colorado, California. You say tomato. They really are. Politically, they're in the same vein on this subject alone. And it's a lot easier to get Ohio as a group to agree to something than a state like California, rather. California has a real problem with that. Like I said, they're segmented. It's many states in one. It's a huge turf. Can you imagine if there was a state on the East Coast that went all the way from the northern side, almost, all the way to the southern tip? Like if Florida extended all the way up to where maybe New York is. I mean, then you only got just a couple of states above New York, don't you? I mean, it's pretty much New York and then Maine. If you're looking at, but you can imagine what that would be like, getting all those people from north to south to agree, and this is what it's like in California. This is why they have such a problem with certain things. And a lot of people want to divide California up into little pieces. There are a lot of secessionists that want, especially on the rich ends, that want to secede from the poorer ends because they view themselves as subsidizing the poorer parts of the state. And they have different alliances politically as well. But the recipe has changed. I got to go through this quickly because I'm not going to have time to get these other stories, and I promised you I would. The recipe has changed in Ohio because now that Issue 3 has gone down, because before it was like, okay, Issue 3's gone down, we still have Ohioans to end prohibition pushing for the finish line because they picked the right time. They picked 2016 to do this, not 2015, like the responsible Ohio people, the monopoly people. The monopoly people, by the way, said after the election, no, we're going to come back next year with a new campaign that's not going to involve a monopoly. They came and buried their heads in the sand, and you haven't heard a peep from them. Ian James has been virtually unheard of since this happened. And Ian's from Colorado. He's been interviewed on this very program. I interviewed Ian as a part of his company. Before Responsible Ohio. I didn't ask to have him back on during that campaign. I let him run his business. But hear from Ian James now. And there are a lot of people who dumped a lot of money into that campaign. I'm not sure if there was anything left. It seems like there probably was not. I don't know what happened to that, but it all fell apart. And so OTEP was like, hey, we're still going to run for that finish line. And then the MPP came in, Marijuana Policy Project, and they were going through their own changes. See, MPP was previously funded by individual investors, individual people who were just philanthropists who said, I'm just going to give you this money for this purpose, for this cause, because I believe in it. And there were a lot of people. There were a few big donors where this money exclusively came from in the beginning. I don't think they saw themselves as needing to be around for much longer, but they did. And many of the people who were involved as individual donors stopped donating. In one case, they died. So this money is now being donated by other interests, and specifically big business. And so now you got big business coming in here wanting to change the way the Marijuana Policy Project does business. See, before it was, we'll come in when you've got good polling in your state, and we'll do this, we'll back your campaign. You've already done all the polling, and you've already put the ballot language together. You've already figured it out and decided what to do. You've put the ballot you've gone and gotten your language approved, and now you need money to get those signatures in and to get some advertising done to help the vote when that comes down. That's what they did here in Michigan. They came and backed, the group here in Michigan that was responsible for that. We reached out to them, but they also responded by saying, yes, you've got the polling. Let's do this. And they did. Nowadays, since big business got involved, they want to change the direction of this. They want to go and propose the ballot language themselves when the polling is right. They don't care if you've already got something that you're trying to do yourself. They're dismissing that wholly, entirely, because they want to replace it with an inclusion. They don't want to just include their part in your language. They want to start it from the beginning up. And the people who were with the MPP, many of them, including Dan Riffle, who's also been on this program, found reasons to depart, to shed away from MPP. I'm not going to have time for this story. There's just no way. This story kind of I don't know. Let's just carry on. Because I only got 3 minutes left. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and stop it. I promised you. So I'm just going to extend the length of the program. We'll stop right there. I'm shutting down the automation because there is a rare occasion where I'll extend the length of the program due to content. And since I promised you a couple of stories, and there's no time left, I'm just going to extend it. So that's accomplished now. We won't be interrupted. So this business with MPP changing the recipe in Ohio, here's how it changed. Because the aftershocks from that big earthquake, MPP coming into Ohio and saying, hey, we're gonna fund a medical marijuana only campaign in Ohio. But we want to write the ballot language. When that happened, and the people behind it were big business, see how citizens already started thinking there's a RO 2.0 coming? Responsible Ohio 2.0 is coming down the pike because MPP is no longer who they were. They're now somebody else. They're a wolf in sheep's clothing is who they are. They're these same monopolists. They're not. But this is the perception being gained. And they're closer to the monopolists than the original people who are like, free the weed, here's some money. Now the business is funding these pushes. They feel uncomfortable about this. So while they may get this done in a medical marijuana only way, we have yet to see the ballot language coming from the MPP on this issue. They will likely have success in Ohio if they do this. That shook up the people at OTEP, and they started falling apart. People started jumping away from OTEP. And I've been faithfully behind them because I fully believe that they had the wherewithal to pull off what they were trying to achieve, which was both medical and retail in one bite, the same way as this other ballot language. But since that one failed, even though the cause of it wasn't the two tied together, the cause of it was the monopoly interest. If you took the monopoly out of the question, Responsible Ohio's proposition would have been a complete success. Because all of the marijuana people would have jumped on board. It was simply the monopoly that got an overwhelming doomsday failure. And so now, I don't know what to think of OTEP because the people who knew how to do fundraising and had connections to big money people who would dump it in given certain conditions have parted ways with OTEP. And OTEP's chief leader, Jacob Wagner, has an injury that's going to require surgery. So he's no longer mobile. And that causes them a leadership issue. And so the question mark has gotten fatter and raised higher above the state of Ohio when it comes to the cannabis question. But this election cycle is going to be like no other, as I started to say earlier, because you've got Bernie Sanders putting Hillary at number 2 position, giving her some heat, giving her a run for her money. And you know what? Bernie Sanders is collecting $27 at a time from lots and lots of people. Hillary's individual donors are a much smaller group. Most of her money is coming from big donors of $500,000 and more. And they seem to be divided on a number of issues, including the cannabis issue. Bernie says, take it off of Schedule 1, like Hillary does. But he also says, make it a states' rights issue. Get the federal government out of the prohibition business forever. And that's the right answer to this question. Let states compete with each other on this question, because you can see even the conservative states, who also are still sold the fear-mongering, still are running with that product in hand, saying, look, no, this is fear. No, this is very dangerous. We can't give up our morals. Look, marijuana is not a moral question. If it was a moral question, you'd be against alcohol, too. You're not. And I don't think alcohol is a moral question either. You're mixing apples and oranges with that argument. Even those conservative places, when they start to look at the money versus, continuing to prop up the lie and continuing to feed the man behind the curtain, who's just a little powerless man, who's using the big curtain as a way to disguise himself with a big, powerful Oz voice that says marijuana bad, people be scared. As soon as people come to the land of Oz and sniff the weed and see the green, the good witch banishes the evil witch, and people come dancing down the yellow brick road. I mean, that's what's going on with these conservative states. You'll see it happening, especially after this next election cycle, because there's not a lot of conservative states, save Florida, that are on the ballot this year. Yet. There are some. There are some exceptions. I don't have time to go over them. But for the most part, the conservative ones are going to be the last holdouts. When you start to see Utah consider retail cannabis, you'll know that goal has been met. I would say Utah is the most conservative place, politically speaking, populist speaking, in the nation, my opine. So this whole election cycle is going to be a juggernaut, because all of the traditional mechanisms by which people predict the outcomes of elections or look towards the future with are being thrown helter-skelter, because north on the compass no longer looks like north. It might be northwest or northeast, depending on which candidate is closest. It's really strange. You got Donald Trump. He's in all this mix. He was a wild card. You've got the marijuana wild card. You've got the millennial wild card. You got the Bernie Sanders wild card. There's too many wild cards. That's too many magnets too close to the compass. And it's too close for even me to predict. Although I'm still going to go out on a limb, and I say they elect old crazy Bernie, as they say. I know a lot of conservative Republicans who agree with me on the ideal that, even though I'll never admit this in public, but Bernie's the best guy in this race. And it doesn't matter if you see, if Trump makes the nomination, it will be the death nail for the Republican Party. I'll just tell you that. Because the core of the Republican Party is completely at odds with the Trump messaging. It's just that part of what has become the Republican Party in their efforts to get a bigger tent, the vast majority agree with Trump, as you can tell by his standing at the top of the polls even yet. What did CNN made a prediction today about all that? I'm really stretching the show out now. I tell you, I'm almost 7 minutes over, and I still haven't gone into these other stories. So there are a lot of question marks in this next election cycle. If you intend to see marijuana a mainstream in this country, you better go figure out how you're going to vote for Bernie. Or even if you can vote for Bernie, you might not be able to in the primary round. In your state, you may be barred from doing that because you're holding a different political card. Here, you don't have. You can choose. You don't have. I don't think you have. You don't. at the primary here, you don't have to vote one way or another or be of one party or another to vote that way. Some states have that preclusion. Like if you're going to vote for, you can only vote for the Republican candidate if you're registered as a Republican. You can't vote for or against the Democratic candidate. That's how it works there. So given past the primary, if Bernie Sanders still is at the top of that ticket, and I say he's neck and neck with Hillary right now and rising above the fence line often, popping above her head. And I think you're going to see him climb that ladder far and wide above her head as time marches on, despite the money factor, despite the fact that she is, in my opinion, the most qualified person to take that office. I think she's also the most tainted by baggage from understanding how government works and how to manipulate it. I think it's anti-manipulation that Sanders is interested in. I think it's de-escalating what has been the wholesale takeover of this country, not by the left, not by the right, but by big business through one party, the Republican Party. Because those are the people are in control right now. You may not think so. You may disagree, but I'm telling you that's what's going on. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Never have been. I've always been skeptical of things. I go sniff them, pick them up, touch them, handle them, poke them, prod them, ask them questions, and then I decide what it is before I'll start. And it's firsthand knowledge, and then I might even go back and confirm with other people. Hey, are you seeing the same thing that I am? Do you have the same opinion as me? That's what I thought before I'll start labeling it as news, before I'll start calling it what it is. A lot of people just get, all they hear is the title of the book, and they're telling you about what its contents are. So I got to move along. Watch out for the wild card in this election because it's a difficult one to predict. Even the best political thinkers, the best talking heads, can't figure it out at this point. They are just dumbfounded because there are too many variables in this. You will not see, unless it seems to be a really landslide in either way, come, one way or the other for either of the elections coming in this presidential cycle, both the primary, which is, piecemeal. It comes state by state up until you get to Super Tuesday, and then there's a couple that follow. But generally by Super Tuesday, we already know who's going to be the nominee. It may be beyond that at this point in both parties because you got Bloomberg looking at coming in now. Bloomberg's got more money than Trump does, and he's been a governor. He's actually had command of a military force before vis-a-vis the New York National Guard. He understands these issues, but he's Trump-like in that he's got a lot of money and represents big business. And the main core of the Republican Party, as we knew it in the Bush days, in the Bush seasons. I see the people who like to send. You hear the music in the background? That is a telemarketer who's been warned not to call me anymore under threat of a violation of federal law. That's a do not call list being violated as we speak. There, it's on the recording. So I got to get onto these other stories and move along. The extra portion, the overtime portion of the Full Melt Show brought to you by NoSmell.com for those no-smell cannabis bags. They're Cannalock bags. Check them out at NoSmell.com. So let me just tell you this. Oh, boy. This is not the story I'm looking for. Hang on. I got to go back. Lawmakers in New Mexico are killing this measure. This is reported by the Cannabis today. You can see the rest of the story because I'm just going to give you the sniff of it at thecannabis.co. Dateline Santa Fe. New Mexico lawmakers have killed a proposal that would legalize and tax recreational marijuana. 6 Democrats joining Republicans to oppose the measure 24-17 as a Senate vote Sunday night. Critics say legalizing marijuana could lead to increased crime rates, but supporters argue that legal pot would be good for the state's economy. And ultimately, I believe, those guys will be the winning side of this argument. Maybe they've won this battle, but the war is still being waged. And at the end of the day, it's the people that believe it's legal pot good for the economy. They're the ones that are going to win this argument. The proposed constitutional amendment would have placed on the November ballot the measure, if approved. Proponents have vowed to try again. An Albuquerque Democrat sponsored the bill. He says New Mexicans will support the change if it's put to a popular vote. A Republican of Farmington opposed the bill, arguing that crime in Denver has increased since Colorado business began selling legal marijuana. That's a lot of hooey. The actual statistics show that crime has gone down in Colorado, not up. And in Denver specifically, which is really the heart of Colorado's marijuana turf. The Denver Post reported in December of 2015 that there had been a slight increase in overall crime in Denver for the year. And when they talk about slight increase, I've seen those statistics, and they're negligible. So check that out, thecannabis.com. And then also this other story about the Senate committee. This is at the tribune.com or trib.com. It's short for Tribune, from the Casper Star Tribune. Dateline Cheyenne. The Senate Judiciary Committee on Monday approving an amended version of a bill that seeks to close a loophole regarding the legal possession of marijuana edibles. Senate File 96 establishes that preparations, compounds, mixtures, or substances, including baked good, candies, drinks, and other edibles containing marijuana or its active ingredient, THC, are illegal to possess. In introducing the bill, a Republican said that there had been conflict in some of Wyoming's district courts over exactly how to treat marijuana possession when it comes in a non-plant form. And so you can see all the details there at trib.com. As these issues progress, you're going to continue to see edibles be a huge problem for the cannabis community because the method by which people are familiar with cannabis, the smoking method, and the high that's achieved from it is vastly different. The effects of it are hugely different when consumed. If you're smoking weed, you might get a little paranoid. You might get a little thrown off balance at first if you smoked too much. Like I'm just telling you, you've never smoked cannabis and you're about to try to. You're not going to need more than 1 or 2 puffs and you're done. You're done. Stop. You won't think that you're done, but you're done. It'll take about, maybe 10 minutes before you feel the full effects of whatever you just consumed. When you talk about eating it, you're not going to feel the effects for upwards of 20 minutes or maybe even longer, depending on your body size and type and how much you've already got in your stomach. If you're eating a marijuana edible on an empty stomach and you've never done it before, I don't care how big you are, chances are you're going to consume more than you'd want to, given the choice. And you do have a choice, it's just not an apparent one. So if you're going to have a cookie for the first time, and I'm just going to tell you 100 milligrams of THC in a product for medibles is now the industry standard. It's the default industry standard. That's what people have settled upon. However, I can tell you 100 milligrams for especially an initial consumer is way too much for one consumption. You're buying a cookie or a brownie, you can't eat the whole cookie. It's multiple doses. You got to look at this like X-Lax in the chocolate bar form. You don't want to eat that whole chocolate bar, trust me. You understand the correlation I'm making? You just want 1 square of the chocolate bar because that's the amount of laxative you need. This is a medication, not a food. And so because you're packaging these foods as tasty treats, things that people like, often they go off on the food end and forget about the drug end. And they do until they've consumed way too much. And by the time they figured out they've consumed way too much, they've already consumed more and are now extremely high from it. And not in a comfortable way, in an out-of-your-skin sort of way. So, folks, if you're going to use the cannabis, you gotta edge in. You got to ramp up. You got to start small, and you'll build a tolerance just like any other thing. You'll build a tolerance, and you'll be able to eat that whole cookie, and maybe a couple at some point. But if you're starting out, it'll be freaky, and that's the part that throws people off of the legislature. That's the part that makes state officials take notice and say, oh, there's a danger here. People are showing up at the hospital, because they're uncomfortable, not because their life's in danger. Ask the cop who called in and called 911 after eating medibles.
The Full Melt Show is a production of TFM Media.